So House of the Dragon is finally here. We finally get to see it. I've waited so long for this show. I'm so glad to actually get to see it on screen. And I'll be honest, I really don't feel like I really don't feel disappointed. I was getting a little bit kind of worried with some of the things the showrunners were saying that made me think, oh man, is this show going to be ultra woke? Is it going to be bad? Is it not going to live up to Game of Thrones standards? I was pleasantly surprised. I thought, you know what? Yeah, it does have its like little feminist moments, a little bit too much at times. But overall, it was pretty interesting episode 1. I won't say it was the best episode I've ever seen of Game of Thrones, which, of course, this isn't Game of Thrones, it's House of the Dragon. But it was good. It was solid. And it was solid from the beginning, and I'll give it that. But let me go ahead and let's get into episode 1 review here on Rants. The things that I loved, the things that I hated. Let's start with the visuals. Visuals were stunning. They were really on par with what Game of Thrones was. One of the first things that you get to see is you get to see this throne room. You get to see a king. I can't remember the king's name, but it's when Viserys is getting, chosen as the king. You get to see those settings. Looks pretty. Looks nice. And then you get to see dragons coming into King's Landing. They looked amazing. Visuals looked really good. Dragons looked really... they looked fantastic. I would even go so far as say the dragons in House of Dragons looks better than what they did in Game of Thrones. Simply because they look unique and different. They don't just look like random, this same beast over and over again, which was some of my problem that I had with the original series, was you couldn't really decipher which one was which one. And it made me not really care about the dragons. I feel like I'm going to care more about the dragons in this one, simply because they look different. They're going to act differently. So that was pretty cool. Political intrigue. I would even go so far as say that maybe the political intrigue in House of the Dragon feels better than what it did even in Game of Thrones. It seems like, the political intrigue here, when you've got Otto Hightower, I think that's his name, Corlys Valerian, you've got, of course, the stuff that's going on with Viserys, and when it comes to the line. And then you've got all these other little kings that, not kings, but all these little lords that, even have kind of challenged him to a certain extent by, saying when they were doing those fight scenes during the jousting matches of where, they go up to, what is her name? Rhaenys Targaryen. And they say, the queen that never was, and all of that stuff. And Viserys basically says to him, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm the king, and they can squabble over that all they want to, but at the end of the day, I'm still king. There was a lot of intrigue that was going on that you can tell that this isn't a kingdom that is just all in one. It's not one that's going to fall in pieces. It's one that is tattered on the brim of maybe falling apart and going into a civil war. And that's amazing. I like that idea of doing that a lot better than everything being perfect. And then all of a sudden the king dies and boom, next thing you know, everything falls apart. So I like where they're going with this. There was a lot of references back to Game of Thrones, and I don't know if I necessarily like that aspect of it, but again, I think this is one of the shows they're not quite sure if it's going to be able to stand on its own, so they have to throw in these references. But let's get into some other little stuff, like I said, the political intrigue, thought the dragons were amazing, visuals look good. Now to get into the meat of the episode. The intro and the explanation, like I said, the audiences was really good. I feel like too many shows go into something. Like you take the Dune movie. Dune movie goes in there and you're just like thrown into this world and you don't really know what's going on and they don't give you an explanation. And I felt like even though Game of Thrones took place and was highly successful on its own, that House of the Dragon did a great job of bringing us back into it and being like, hey, this is what is going on at this time period. This is what is happening here. I like the intro. I like just how it introduced the characters. I thought that was really great. I'll say this. There's one character that I did not think that I would even be talking about, and that is Viserys. You know, you hear all of you for the last couple of years when it comes to this show. You know, talk about the High Towers. They talk about Corlys Velaryon and Rhaenys and Daemon and all those other kind of characters. You hear about all of those, but to me, the character that stood out the most, that was the most compelling, was Viserys. I think, people I know love Matt Smith's Daemon Targaryen, but to me, I thought it was Viserys that really stole this episode. Simply because you saw the best, you saw the worst. When I first saw him, I thought, oh, well, this is going to be another Robert Baratheon. This is going to be a guy that really, his council controls him. He don't really care what goes on. He only cares about, jousting matches and, getting an heir. But he don't really care about, what is going on necessarily with his people. And we get to see a little bit more of, like, wait, hold on a moment. Actually, he does care a little bit more. And maybe that's a little bit of a ruse of he's a better king than what he sometimes lets on to be. Or at least he's more in control than what he lets on to be to most people. Because when Daemon challenges him in this episode, I thought that was a really powerful moment. Because you got to see just what Viserys really is about. He stood his ground. He made Daemon back down. Because he realized, hey, I'm king here. What I say goes. And that's just that. And I'm putting my foot down. You've gone a step too far in this one instance, and I'm going to let you know that. I thought that's a pretty powerful king. That's something we really didn't get to see much of in Game of Thrones. We got to see weak kings and weak guys trying to be the king in so many different ways. Like, you could go throughout all of Game of Thrones, and all the guys that were trying to really get power were really weak in a lot of different ways. Stannis kind of had his weak moments. His brother, that slips my mind, had his weak moments. A lot of these other men that were trying to get the throne, even Ned Stark was kind of had his weak moments. None of them was qualified to be that king. So I feel like Viserys really stepping up there really impressed me. And I loved, you know what? I'm going to be sad to see this character go. Because this character is going to leave. Because all this has got to start. And I'm going to be sad to see him go because he is truly a character that I really feel like I could get behind. Another character that I really like, Otto Hightower. He's going to be another Littlefinger. Like, he's just got that way about him. You could tell that he's like just trying to like persuade the king here. When Corlys Velaryon, when he brings up something, Otto thanks him for bringing it up and says, well, the king will consider it, and things along those lines, and basically just shuts him up and shows his power, shows him that he's in control of that situation, that he needs to slow his roll down a little bit when it comes to it. So I think he's going to be the Littlefinger like character, simply because of the way that he kind of presented his daughter, which was in a very shocking way. The king's wife passes, and he goes and he says, hey, Alicent, go in there to the king and entertain him. Which we all kind of understand what that means. That was kind of that's when I really come to terms that this is the little finger. This is the guy that's going to be, that's going to have this nice, casual face about him, that's going to present himself in a real, pristine kind of way, but then going to try to do whatever it takes to acquire power for himself. So I like I said, I like Viserys. I like Otto Hightower. Allison Hightower is another one. I really could get behind her. She's one that I felt like I could root for. I don't know about Rhaenyra. I feel like I really enjoyed Allison in this role. I don't know how it's going to be going further on down, but I feel like she's the person that, she's more innocent than the rest of them. She's not vying for anything. She's not really wanting anything. She's just trying to do what's best for her family in that regard. And to me, that's just a person that just automatically you feel like that's a Jon Snow. I say Jon Snow-like character only because of the innocence about him. But it feels like a character that, is one of the only ones that really isn't truly trying to vie for power, at least not at this moment. Of course, we know when children get involved, that changes everything, and rightfully so on things, especially in a kill or be killed world. So I really liked her character. Corlys Velaryon, he's one that, a lot of people was kind of pissed about, who they chose to be in that role, but I thought he did a pretty good job. I like the actor who plays him. And I like his wife in this, Princess Rhaenys. I thought she did a really good job. Of course, in the previews that she's going to be that heavy-handed, on the, feminist crap about, men will never let women rule on the throne. And I'll get into that a little bit later in this review. But I do have some simple problems when it comes to that. But I thought it was really cool, that little moment where, that knight comes up to him and he's talking about, the queen that never was. And, how she has his backing. I think it was a Baratheon out of all people that did that. And I thought that was really an interesting moment in the jousting tournament. The City Watch scene. That was a cool scene. That was a brutal scene. That was a scene that really reminded you of Game of Thrones. If you had forgot that this is a Game of Thrones prequel, you're reminded at the City Watch scene. Because Daemon made that brutal. But he probably did, at the end of the day, the right thing. That's the thing. Daemon is presented as this evil character. But at the end of the day, he's still trying to do what he feels is necessary to rule the land appropriately. And he feels like his brother is weak, and he has to be, therefore, strong. And so, the way he did the City Watch, showing the City Watch at its full strength, was pretty cool. I like that scene. I enjoyed the brutality of it. The Viserys tragedy, that was the thing that really stood out this episode when it comes to people. Everyone will be talking about it. The childbirth scene, I wasn't a big fan of. I really, truly wasn't. I thought they really played that out a little too much. I thought what was more, and the reason, and I said this in my last video when it come to Game of Thrones about George R. R. Martin saying this is going to be the Red Wedding moment. It wasn't the Red Wedding moment. Simply because of what I said in my last video. We didn't care enough about the Queen and about that baby for it to be a Red Wedding moment. I was starting to feel something for Viserys at this point about, hey, he's, a character that I can feel sorry for on that. And I felt the tragedy that he had to endure more than I did what exactly happened in the childbirth. That affected me more, when he's at the council and he just says, hey, all y'all are basically vipers. My wife and my son just died. and then y'all are trying to bring up, heirs and things along those lines. That was when you really start feeling for this character. And so his tragedy was compelling. They did do a very good job in that. Now for the bad. And this is what, as a pessimist, the things that I always love to get into is the bad. I usually start off with it because I'm usually so happy to pick apart a show. Wasn't feeling Rhaenyra. Whatsoever on this show. They keep trying to present her as a likable character. Like a Daenerys Targaryen character, but she lacks the power of the room that Daenerys showed. The woman who played Daenerys Targaryen, Emilia Clarke, I think is her name. She commands the room when she's in there. Even at the beginning of that, you still felt something for that character. I didn't feel nothing for Rhaenyra whatsoever. I felt like she's somebody that feels like she's getting passed over. She's somebody that cared for her mom, but she's someone who wants to be queen. But I never felt like, oh man, this is the person I want to root for. I just didn't get that aspect about it. When her and Daemon were having that little conversation, I'm like, oh, what's going on here? I still didn't get in. Still wasn't like, I don't care enough to get involved into what was going on that scene. What the behind the scenes meant when it come to that. What they were thinking in that scene. I didn't care enough about that character, and I don't know if I will. I think this is going to be a real... When it comes to hit or miss characters, I feel like this is a miss for me. And I feel like the actress who played the role did the role as good as it was to be given. I just feel like overall, it's just not a very good character. That's just my point of view. Now, it might get better later on, and I might have a completely different opinion. But this being episode 1, this is just my initial thoughts of her. And like I mentioned earlier, childbirth scene... to me was just more cringe than anything. I see what they were trying to go at, like, oh, this king made this decision for his wife of, killing her to save the baby. And I see from a lens of 2022 how people be like, ooh, it's kind of evil in a way. But the way I personally looked at it, in this realm that they're in, and even what kings had to endure before, we had already been told by the small council that Daemon was not the heir that they wanted. He was not the heir that they wanted. They feared him. They thought he was going to be a new Maegor, I think was his name. They thought he was going to be this really tyrant, this tyrant of a king. So you had Viserys having to make this choice. It's either my wife dies, or I try to, and I'm left without an heir, or I'm left with this heir, maybe, that can therefore bring peace to this realm. And my brother is no longer going to be the heir to the throne, which is going to make for a more peaceful transition. And someone that maybe the kingdom can get behind. But, so I totally understand the decision that was made. The decision was made for the kingdom. Because you could tell he cared about his wife, but you could tell the decision was made more for the kingdom and not just his desire to have a son, but the kingdom itself. I feel like in any other situation, 99.9% of the time, probably the women, if given the choice, would probably have said, hey, I want to save my child's life if I can save my child's life. That's usually probably the way it would go anyways, but I just kind of felt like maybe they were trying to make a point there that I felt like from a 2022 lens, that could work, but from an overall standpoint, if you really sit there and think about it, a king without an heir and a king whose heir is going to be a tyrant, or that the land already thinks is going to be a tyrant, might not be the right solution to that problem. Her death, if the baby would have lived, would have maybe have saved the kingdom. Sadly, unfortunately, the baby passes away as well, and he's left with no wife and no heir. So, at the end of the day, I totally get it from a lens of 2022. People are going to think, well, that was a cruel, cruel decision he made. But at the end of the day, that was probably a decision that she would have made, and that was probably a decision that that was probably better for the kingdom as a whole, to save lives. So, I don't know. That's just my personal opinion on that specific scene. So, yeah, I felt like that scene was kind of a waste to me. It wasn't a red wedding scene. I didn't care enough about those characters for it to be a red wedding scene. Another thing I absolutely hated about it, when the small council kept referring to Rhaenyra, Rhaenyra can't be your heir because in 100 years we've never had a queen. Do you realize how long 100 years is? 100 years is like your grandma. Like, literally. 100 years is like your grandma. So, like, from your grandma to, I don't know, myself. Like, my grandma this year would have turned 100. So, we're talking about that 100 years time that we can have any kind of change within that 100 period of time. Totally get it if it's like 600, 1,000 years. But 100, like, really? Really? Like, that's where we're going with this. I get it was like 100 and something, but still it's 100. I kind of feel like that's not a big enough legacy to really make that into something. I feel like if it was something that happened now for like hundreds of years, totally get it. But 100 years just doesn't seem long enough for me to buy into that being really what you're wanting there. And then plus that makes no sense. Because at the same time that these people are saying this, they're like, well, what about Rhaenys? So I'm like, what are y'all talking about? Like, y'all are choosing between Rhaenys or Rhaenyra, and you're trying to make this case for Rhaenyra that she can't be queen because we never had a queen in 100 years. But at the same time, some of the same people was calling for, well, Rhaenys has a better, claim to the throne. So I'm like, what is going on in that scene? Like, it feels like that scene could have been better conducted. If they want to say men don't want women to rule, then maybe they shouldn't have the same men maybe try to get other women to rule. You know what I mean? Like, that felt stupid to me. So that was a big letdown for me. Now, as far as Matt Smith goes, as Daemon Targaryen, I liked Daemon. Don't get me wrong. I liked Daemon Targaryen in this specific show. Matt Smith has the acting chops needed for this role. Does a fantastic job in this. I just personally don't like his look. He looks like he's wearing a wig. He doesn't come off to me as this villainous character that needed to be there. They needed a more rough looking guy, a guy that just looks the part of a villain. I don't feel like Matt Smith really does that role. Matt Smith looks like a guy that, like, you see on the street, you're gonna be like, oh, that looks like a nice guy. They needed a guy that you see on the street in real life, and he's like, you're like, whoa, that dude looks like somebody that could really beat me up. That's what they needed in Daemon. And I will always think that about that. I like Matt Smith as an actor. I just personally don't think as Daemon he does. He can live up to what Daemon really should be. Now, this is episode 1. Could be getting better. He did have some good moments in it. But overall, I just didn't enjoy that character as much as I thought I would. And then last but not least, The Aegon prophecy. And that's something that I feel like not a lot of people are really discussing. After this episode, is the Aegon prophecy. We knew that there was a prophecy about the doom of Valyria, but we didn't know why Aegon, the Conqueror, decided to take over Westeros. Well, it was because he had a dream of the White Walkers. Now, I had a couple of problems with this. One, this is kind of new. Don't mind that they maybe added that into it. But I hated the idea of it simply because it brought back memories of the White Walkers. And they're not going to have White Walkers in this show. So what was the point? And none of that will take place during this show. So why bring that up? Why bring back the one thing that could cause the end of this show is people not tuning in because they're still pissed about Game of Thrones. Because of the White Walkers. Because how Game of Thrones handled the White Walkers. So I'm like, why just jab that knife into people just a little bit more to remind them of something that really has no relevance to this show anyways. So no, I didn't like the prophecy in that. I felt like that was kind of silly. I don't mind the prophecy overall because that maybe gives some depth to the lore. But as far as adding it into this show, at the first episode, I'm like, ooh, that's just a little too quick. A little too quick. It's still some of those wounds are festering a little bit. Watching this House of the Dragon, I'll admit there was times that I was kind of like, ooh, I kept going back to the last episode of Game of Thrones and thinking, wow, what a waste of my time for 8 years. So you know what? Maybe a bad choice of bringing back the Game of Thrones music as well. But overall, I mean, if you want to know my true take on this, I actually would give this an 8 out of 10. I really would. I enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed this episode. I think this was the perfect way to start off this series. Like I said, I did have some small complaints. Wasn't a big fan of Rhaenyra. I totally get she's going to play a big part later on. But I'm still in the hopes that I might actually like her character moving forward. Because she does have a claim to the throne, and maybe that'll justify, me liking her in some way. And I felt like the childbirth scene was just a little too much and really kind of a waste of time. Like I said, from 2022 eyes, that might seem like a really horrific thing. But, the choice that was made. But, when you're living in a world where if you don't have an heir, your whole kingdom goes up in flames. And thousands, if not millions of people die because of civil war or strife or whatever may come. Especially when there's dragons involved. You probably don't want that to happen because you'll find out a little bit later in this show that's exactly what happens without an heir. So yeah, in the end, probably the right choice. Right choice, just the wrong thing. Just put it that way. But overall, I give this about an 8 out of 10. I really got into this show. I seem like I'm going to like most of the characters. I like Viserys. I think he plays a great role in this. I know he's not going to be around forever. But I like some of the other side characters as well. I think this is going to be a good show. I don't know if it's going to be great. But it's going to be a good show. And it's going to be a show that I can get behind. But overall, guys, let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know. And as always, thanks for watching. Y'all take care.